Welcome to the Future Resolution, Miles Mediation and Arbitration's podcast. We are here today with the District Attorney for DeKalb County, Georgia, Sherry Boston. I am Winter Wheeler. I am a mediator and arbitrator at Miles Mediation. I am beyond excited today because this is an interview that I wanted to do basically forever. Okay, so forever is an exaggeration, but since she became the district attorney of DeKalb County, I have wanted to talk to her. And so this is really the first time that I've gotten to talk to her on the record. Can I call it on the record for Miles Mediation? I don't know. I don't even know.
You can call it on the record. You can call it on the record.
So Sherry, thank you so much for being here. I think that maybe the first time that I spoke to you was about, I don't know, maybe 3 or so years ago. And I'm assuming you don't remember this. And we were at some lawyers club event. And I think it was while you were campaigning, I think. And I was so excited to meet you. I know that you don't remember this at all. And I was just like, oh my God, somebody's going to introduce me to her. Oh my God. And you were just so sweet and kind and cordial. And I don't vote in DeKalb County. So I was really just wasting your time. But you did. You spent time with me and you talked to me and you were just amazing, as you always are. And, you know, when you were running that campaign, I took the time to learn a lot about you. I live out in Cobb County. I live in Marietta. So I'm definitely a suburbanite, but I have lived in Atlanta. I intend to live in Atlanta again. I have 4 children who I assume will live in Atlanta at some point in their lives, because what college kid is excited to live in Marietta? So I definitely pay attention to what's going on in Atlanta. And I just was excited about your campaign, and I remain very excited about what it is that you are doing in DeKalb County. So I thank you for being here, and I'm excited.
Well, thank you, Winter. I'm just honored and thrilled that we have the opportunity to have this candid conversation today. So thank you for inviting me.
Awesome. So, I think the first time that we met, we were at some like lawyers club event or something like that. And just kind of talking generally about criminal justice reform and how each of us got to where we were. And, you know, I went the insurance defense kind of private civil route. And you took a different route. So can you tell me a bit, and our listeners, of course, a bit about that and how you arrived at the decision, I guess, of deciding to run for public office?
Well, I will say that story is a long story of how I got to where I am, and probably longer than we have today. But I will say that some people know that I started my career in the private sector, and I worked as a criminal defense lawyer for 12 years. And if you had told me when I graduated from Emory Law School that, you know, two decades later, I would be the elected district attorney for the county in which I attended law school, I probably would have laughed in your face and thought that was the most ridiculous proposition. Because when I graduated from law school, you know, my intent was to be a defense lawyer, to work with people that were charged with committing crimes. And I felt really passionately and strongly about that work. And, what I didn't realize is that there would be an avenue and opportunity for me to continue really what I wanted to do, but with a greater, paintbrush, a bigger audience, and an ability to effectuate change across many cases and not just one case at a time. And I learned a lot during the years that I had an opportunity to do the work that I was doing. And really, over the course of 12 years, where I represented all different kinds of people across the spectrum, I represented people that were wealthy, that had the means to hire the best lawyer that they could find. And I represented people on pro bono cases, or even walking into courtrooms where I'd be there on a case and there'd be someone there that I'm watching in court and thinking to myself, they need someone to speak up for them, and everywhere in between. And so I had an opportunity to really see how mental health, substance abuse, circumstances really affected how people were treated in the criminal justice system, and how the criminal justice system sometimes ended up being a place where those issues really shouldn't be addressed. And so I didn't really intend on becoming a prosecutor. It just kind of happened. Really, there was a point in my life where I thought I wanted to be a judge. And now I'm grateful that did not happen. No offense to my judge friends out there. I have a lot of them. I just never knew that I wasn't ready to not continue being an advocate. And as a judge, you can't be an advocate.
Right.
And I loved advocacy. I didn't realize how much I wasn't ready to be away from it until I had the opportunity to have a larger platform. And so the reality of it is in 2009, I was running for state court judge in an open seat with 4 other people. And that election ended up being canceled kind of midstream and turned into an appointment unexpectedly. And so I went to the big interview in front of the JNC. I made the short list. I interviewed with the governor. I felt confident that, things were going my way. And then I didn't get it.
Right.
And I was terribly, terribly devastated because I thought this was the path that I was meant to be on. And it had been in my sort of mind that had been ripped away from me. But I say all the time now, and it's people that know me have heard me say this when I talk about not only my story, but what's next in the world for me or even other people, is that man's rejection is God's protection. And so in that moment, I couldn't see or feel that. But what I went on to understand is that rejection was protecting me from something that I was not meant to do, that there was something different that was in store for me, that God had laid out for me. And I just didn't know it. So I was mad and I was upset and I cried for many days. But out of that opportunity birthed the real opportunity that was forming, because I did not get that state court judgeship, but less than, I don't know, maybe a month later, the Solicitor General position for DeKalb opened up when Gwen Keys Fleming got tapped by then President Obama to lead the southern region of the EPA. She resigned as DA, and the then solicitor resigned to run for DA, and the solicitor position opened up. And I had a number of people in my life that asked me to consider that role. And I said, what? I've never been a prosecutor. I've spent my whole career as a defense lawyer. I've been a magistrate court judge, a municipal court judge, but a prosecutor, why? Like, how do you even see me in this role? And that's where I say you really have to have people around you that can see things for you when you can't see them as clearly. And there were a lot of people that encouraged me to pursue that opportunity. And I did. And then Governor Sonny Perdue, who had interviewed me for the judgeship and didn't give it to me, called me on December, it was New Year's Eve day. I'll never forget it. Called me, and it was crazy because I was home with my two daughters. It was holidays, and I was loading them in the car, and they were, I don't know, they were like, I think they were like 4 and 2 at the time, or 5 and 3, somewhere around there, 4 and 2, I think. And I'm loading them, trying to load them in the car because we're on our way to the Children's Museum in Atlanta. And my phone rings. And, you know, when you're a mom and you've got the diaper bag and this bag and your purse and your keys. And I literally like barely looked at the number. I picked up the phone and I'm like, hello. And there's this voice on the other line that says, please hold for the governor. And I'm like, what? This is so crazy. And my kids are in the car like, Mommy, what are you doing? And that was then Governor Sonny Perdue saying, I would like you to serve as the next solicitor of DeKalb County. Can you do that for me? And less than 5 days later, I was being sworn in on the very last hours of the governor's time in office. He was literally packing up around me. And I was sworn in as the solicitor for DeKalb County. And that began my road to elected prosecution, public office, and ultimately laid the groundwork for me now sitting here almost 10 years later as the district attorney of DeKalb County.
That is an amazing story for several reasons. And so let me touch on a couple of them. First of all, congratulations for being able to juggle all of that and the 2 babies. I understand what that's like. I get these phone calls. For example, I got a phone call from Sonia, who works with you, and I think I had all 4 of my kids like hanging off of me at one time. And I was like, hello. You know, completely unprofessional. And she was very polite. And she's like, hello. And, you know, handled that. So, you know, I completely understand how you feel with, I mean, I can't even understand actually, like what it would be like to get that call. But I understand what it's like to get like a professional call while you're dealing with children and like trying to, you know, navigate your professional life and your personal life all in the same space. I mean, so hats off just for being able to do that. That in itself is insane. But your call to community service and activism, I mean, that's kind of incredible. You know, we talk about having a call, like a God-given call and a gift, and, you know, listening and receiving it and trying not to be upset when you don't get something that you thought was for you, you know? So when you didn't get that seat for judge that you thought that you wanted, or that you did want, you wanted it. But when you realize that was not for you, you know, just kind of giving it over to God and saying, okay, well, maybe this is not what was meant for me, but I'm here for what's meant for me. And then receiving that and being ready for it when it came to you. I mean, that's a huge deal. I think a lot of us kind of, not even kind of, we struggle with that. We struggle with being ready for what is actually made for us. I think it's awesome that, you know, you were able to move on from the dream that you wanted, and you were ready to move into what God needed from you and go into what the community needed from you. So, I mean, I'm just going to applaud you for that, because that was a smooth transition.
You know? Thank you. And you know, when I tell that story, because you know, there's, like I said, so many details in there that I've had to cut out to get to just
Yeah.
a manageable moment. But I like to tell that, and I say that because I don't, um, I didn't necessarily have that faith when it happened. And that's why I like to share the story, because it was a lesson that I learned in that moment, that after that, when I took chances and I made choices, I held on to that moment. So as I was going through it, initially back in 2009, it was, or 2010, um, I didn't see it for what it was. But once I moved past that moment and had an opportunity to reflect on where I had landed as a result of going through that process, I share that with people because it is now a faith that people that know me, that I live, and every decision I make, I have learned to kind of follow that instinct and my faith. And it's not easy, but I have recognized that thus far it's gotten me where I needed to be. And it's not easy for everyone. I mean, even my husband, sometimes he's very practical. And so when I have to make these decisions and I say things like, well, I just have faith that it's going to work, like that there's meaning to this. And then if it doesn't happen, it meant that I was supposed to be here or there doing this or that. And I feel very confident in that, but it drives him like crazy. But now that I recognize it, I am very attuned to it. I listen to it, and it's like this clear voice in my head that I hear. But I haven't always been that way. And so that's why I like to share it, because I want to encourage people to listen to that voice and to be driven to make decisions that perhaps are scary, but be open to those doors of opportunity that may lend itself to something even bigger or better for you than you even imagined.
And I love that for several reasons, but for one, because I'm trying to do that in my own in my own life. I try to listen, and I've decided that anything that I want, that I and I pray for, and I want, and I'm hoping to get. If I don't get it, I'm just, that wasn't it. That really wasn't it for me. I'm not a psychic or anything of the sort, if those even exist. So if something is not meant for me, it just wasn't meant for me, and I can't miss a blessing, because what God wants for me, I can't miss out on. Right. So I may have been wrong in what I thought God wanted for me, but God is not wrong. So
Right.
whatever it is that he wants, I will get. And it's fine. If it wasn't this thing, then it's the next thing. So it's okay. And yeah, my husband struggles with that, but he'll be all right. So we're working on that at my house too. But so another thing that you are really known for is community outreach, which I think is really exciting. A lot of DAs are not known. They're not known for their community outreach. And in fact, they're known for the opposite. And you have taken basically every opportunity possible to really reach out into your community and focus on things that are important to the people that you serve. And while I'm on that topic, I think that it's important that you seem to really focus your mission on serving people and not so much on dictating what people should and should not be doing. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I am really, I think being solicitor gave me the opportunity to understand the importance of connecting with your community. Because, I love being DA, but I will tell you, being solicitor is a great job.
Okay.
Because you get the opportunity to like really do good work without dealing with the cases that just keep you up all night. And because the solicitor's office is misdemeanors, there are obviously a lot of serious, domestic violence cases in particular that were very difficult as solicitor, but you really get to focus on community because you can make change. And when people commit misdemeanors, there is a real shot of keeping people out of the criminal justice system. So I was really grateful to have the opportunity that allowed me to get out in the community, educate the public on issues, create programs that gave people a second chance before they graduated to something that left me with no choice. Mm-hmm. Because there are some felony crimes where it's just like, it's too late. There's not a whole lot I can do. Especially if it's a crime that carries a mandatory minimum offense or is, one of our 7 deadlies. So I really enjoyed the opportunity of having a chance to build consensus in the community and roll out program and an initiative that help people to understand what we could do in our system to help people. And so I carried that with me into the DA's office. Obviously, it's in a different way because I'm dealing with different crimes and different issues. But having said that, it's a great responsibility because I realized that as district attorney, at the time that I was elected, I became the only African-American female district attorney in the state of Georgia. And I realized very quickly that I had a large platform and a really big megaphone. And as a district attorney, you can do one of two things. You can either step down off that podium and never pick up that megaphone and be in your office and no one ever see you and do your job. Mm-hmm. Or you can build upon that and use your voice in a way that will not only inspire your community, help your community, but understand that people really want to hear what you have to say and that your words matter. And sometimes I forget that my words matter because I'm like, I have my own opinion.
Yeah.
And sometimes you forget that, I'm just thinking, well, this is just what Sherry Boston thinks. And it's not until someone grabs that soundbite that I didn't even think about being in a public sphere and puts it out in the world. And it becomes, well, District Attorney Sherry Boston said X, Y, and Z. And that is, it's crazy sometimes because it just reinforces to me how important it is to have an opinion. Mm-hmm. Because people are listening and they are inspired, and the things that I say do matter to different groups of people. And so I do want to continue to make sure I use my position for good and my megaphone for highlighting areas where I think need to be heard from.
And all of that is just so amazing to me. I love that. I love having you as an elected official. Like you mentioned, you are a Black female DA, which is so rare, in Georgia, but all over the country. We're starting to see cases around our nation about women who have been trafficked, right? And so these cases often come up when a woman has, let's say, using a legal term, battered or murdered a person who has trafficked her, right? Mm-hmm. And she's on trial for murder. And what do we do with that? And I know that you are involved on Georgia's Care Commission. So, how do your underlying values work, in conjunction with the mission of that team? And how are you pushing forward your own agenda in that regard?
So, I was really honored that the First Lady and the Governor asked me to serve on the Grace Commission, given my commitment really for the last 10 years to domestic violence and human trafficking and sexual assault. Those are all areas that I have been committed to drawing attention to, a problem that is a lot more pervasive in our community than most people probably think. And so I'm glad that we've had that opportunity. But I will say that the thing about being district attorney is for so long, not unlike most professions, it has been a profession that's been dominated primarily by Caucasian men. And I have nothing against Caucasian men, friends with many of them. And they are a part of our community. But I think what we know is that diversity of experience, diversity when it comes to race, and obviously gender, we all bring to the space that we're in the perspectives that we have experienced.
Right.
And so as a woman, and particularly as a woman of color, I think what I brought to the table in looking and examining these types of issues is obviously different than what a man would bring to the table. And so that's why I think it's so important to have that diversity in the room, because we're going to bring different voices. Not that a man can't empathize with a sexual assault victim or a woman that has been in a domestic violence relationship, but as a woman, I can relate to the fear of a sexual assault. I can remember times where people have made comments towards me that were misogynistic and represented sexual harassment. I can remember being a young lawyer and having older lawyers call me baby, or even touch the back of my backside, is like patting me on the back, the back, like that was appropriate. And we bring all these experiences to what we're doing. And so for me, especially issues around domestic violence, an area where I think has remained hidden for a long time, and certainly very hidden in the Black community. The ability to talk about these things openly and advocate for them has been an honor and a privilege, and something that I want to continue to make sure I lend my voice to, are those areas that we're just too scared to talk about in public, but we need to be talking about in public.
No, absolutely. And we just had our Me Too movement, really, which was a long time coming. Yeah. Frankly, for women in our country, dealing with the types of things that you just mentioned. And for women, those are common things. Those are things that all of us were dealing with, and we just kind of moved on. These things would happen, and it was like, oh, your boss did that. Well, my boss did that too. And then, you kind of accepted it, and you moved on, and then you would come up with ways that you could either try to avoid it in the future, or just learn how to ignore it. And so I think that the Me Too movement became what it did because, like you were saying, it was a universal experience that women were having that no one was speaking up against. And so when we have women like you who have had those experiences, but then, also have a power to deal with those experiences and have the ability to, give the victims recourse, then we can address those things. But, trying to talk to a man about those issues, it was like, oh, typically they didn't care. It was, that's something that happens. and before we had women in positions where we could say, no, this is wrong, and they understood it, a lot of the time it was, oh, but that's just something that happens. It's just like par for the course. It's okay. Like, he didn't attack you, and it was hard to get your voice heard. And so I think it's just another reason that it's really important to have women in the type of position that you're in. And I think it's another reason that it's important to have women of color, specifically Black women, in your position, because as Black people, we experience life differently than other races. And sometimes we try to lump people of color, whatever you want, whatever that means, together, where, when people who are Black specifically, have different experiences from every other race. So I think it's important to have someone like you who is Black and female and can deal with a lot of these issues. So, for that, I mean, you know what? I feel like I have just been giving you like the hat tip, like this entire interview. So, I mean, here's another one. I mean, my God. But yeah, I mean, it's just so important to see women and Black women in these positions, because we're just, we're in this unique kind of intersection, being female and a minority, and being able to understand all of these different perspectives. And even if you can't like personally relate to, let's say an Asian American woman's specific experience, you understand what it's like to be, quote, other, right? You know what it's like. And so when she tells you she's had an experience of being an other or being othered, you can say, well, I know what it's like to be othered. So I can completely understand what you're saying in that respect. So I can hear you and I can acknowledge that,
Absolutely. And, this, having this job is already a very isolating role. No matter what your race, creed, color, or gender is. I mean, there are only 49 elected district attorneys in the state. And some of the things you have to encounter, only someone that is in your shoes can understand. Yeah. So you already have this small universe. And then you add in the gender piece and the race piece, and it can be really isolating, and difficult and emotional and a struggle. And so when I say across the country, less than 1% of African American women are in the role of chief prosecutor, I don't say that lightly, in part because I've met almost all of them, because the number is just so small.
You can get them all in a room.
It's actually not that hard. But having said that, the things that we have experienced and are experiencing when we're doing our jobs in the same way as our white male counterparts, what we are experiencing is very different. The level of criticism and how we are criticized is very different. And it's difficult. And so I'm grateful to be able to lean on my DA sisters. And, there's been a lot of articles along the way about, the sisterhood that's been formed between people like myself and Marilyn Mosby and Kim Fox and Aramis Ayala, to name just a few. Those were the three women that immediately became a part of my circle upon coming DA, and I have continued to lean on them over the last 4 years when making difficult decisions, when faced with really personal criticisms that come at you, when you are called names that invoke misogynistic terms, when you are called names that, are racial slurs, when people call you the N-word, when they call you the B-word, when they call you a slut, because you're doing your job, whatever that is, it's become very personal. And I can tell you that I've heard very few, if any, of my male counterparts, especially my white male counterparts, say that they have received emails, texts, or letters outlining that level of personal animus, and frankly, it's solely meant to intimidate, because there are people that don't think that we, Black women, deserve to be in this position of power, and want to remove the megaphone from your hand and want to knock you off of that platform that you've been given to effectuate change. And as much as you want to continue to do what you're doing because you know that people are hearing you and you're inspiring others, it takes a lot to stand up there some days and just act like it doesn't face you, because it does.
Yeah, absolutely.
It does. And so we lean on each other to make it through the day and to remind each other. And my good friend Marilyn Mosby, the state's attorney in Baltimore, always likes to say, this is bigger than us. This is bigger than us. And she's so right. And it's always great when she reminds us of that when we're in a moment where we're questioning everything. She always reminds us that what we're doing now is bigger than us and will have the opportunity to shape the world and the platform when we're no longer even naturally here, when we've moved on to something else, or hopefully decades from now when my children have children, that it will have effectuated a change that reminds everyone that this moment is bigger than all of us.
Absolutely. I love that. I love that. Yeah. And, you know, we remember Marilyn Mosby specifically, you know, she dealt with Freddie Gray in Baltimore, and we don't need to get into all of that, but that was a huge deal in our country. And many, many people around our country feel that justice was not served, despite the fact that Ms. Mobley did
everything that she could to get justice.
She did everything that she could. Yes, thank you for jumping in. I was having an emotional time with that.
But it is a stark reminder, and it's a reminder that, you know, we are in these roles to seek justice, but sometimes no matter how hard you fight, you aren't going to get it.
Right.
And, you know, Marilyn was, you know, and I like to remind people that she'd only been in office maybe 6 months before the death of Freddie Gray.
Was it even that long?
It was about 6 months.
God,
it was about 6 months.
Yeah, like when I think about it, it was almost like these two things were simultaneous, because I remember him dying, and then I remember her being elected, and then all of this kind of just happening all at the same time. And I remember thinking that she had been put in this insurmountable position where there was nothing that she was going to be able to do that was going to make everyone happy. But that really does bring me to my next point. So, you know, for a district attorney, right, you're dealing with bringing charges based on the laws as they're written. So, and a lot of people get angry with you about that unnecessarily. And not unnecessarily. I'll take back unnecessarily, but maybe unfairly, right? So let's take George Floyd, for example, right? We you know, George Floyd was murdered in Minneapolis a few weeks ago. And people are concerned or upset about the police officer who murdered him, being charged with second-degree murder now, initially with third-degree, moved up to second-degree. And of course, this is under Minnesota law and not Georgia. So, so for anyone who is not familiar with Minnesota law, maybe go read that for a second before you get too riled up about this. But charged with second degree under Minnesota law and not first degree. And there was a lot of discussion about, and it's ongoing, about why wasn't he charged with first degree murder? And, basically the reason is because the law as written does not support the charge. So, we can only do as attorneys, and of course you as DA, you can only do what the law allows you to do. You work within the confines of the law as it is written, right?
Absolutely. And I mean, it's really tough because every state has different laws and different facts and circumstances that you have to prove in order to meet that burden beyond a reasonable doubt. And I will tell you that police officer use of force or excessive force cases are some of the most, if not the most difficult cases to prove in court, because jurors naturally want to give police officers the benefit of the doubt. And we saw this very much so in the Anthony Hill case. When we tried Officer Olson for the death of Anthony Hill, who was naked, unarmed, and having a mental health crisis. And we saw him gunned down at the hands of a police officer while he was trying to get help for what was happening in his mind.
Right.
And so that was a case where the jury deliberated for 5 days, and even and a case in which we charged the highest level of murder in the state of Georgia that we could, which was felony murder. And we had jurors that were unwilling to find him guilty of murder. They found him guilty of aggravated assault and violation of oath of office and making a false statement, but could not and did not want to say the word murder, despite the fact that they agreed that he committed an unlawful assault that ultimately ended in the death of another.
Right.
And so it was just a reminder that these cases are very difficult, that people want to continue to give officers the benefit of the doubt and feel very uneasy about sending police officers to prison for extended periods of time as a result of their actions. And so, there are so many layers to police brutality and excessive force. I mean, when we see George Floyd's video on the TV, and I watched all 8 minutes of it, as difficult as it was to watch, it's just a reminder that that's just the start of that case within the criminal justice system. It has a long way to go, and an even longer way when you have to try to convince 12 people, all 12, unanimously that the outcome should be murder and not something else. So, I'm not super familiar with what the laws are there. I do know that the Attorney General is a man of high integrity and would bring the charges that he believes the evidence can bear. And it's not as simple as charging someone with murder, at least not right now with the way the law is written. And so we have to continue to make sure that we can find ways to protect the community, to increase better relations between police officers and the community for which it serves. And I think more than ever now, we're looking at having a national dialogue. And I mean, I think I got an alert on my phone right before we started that there perhaps is some bipartisan consensus in Washington right now about the types of national reforms that can be made, although many of these issues have to be addressed locally. But more than anything, I've never in my life in this area, and we've been talking about this area for a long time, seen the type of movement and robust conversation that we've gotten as a result of the death of George Floyd. And so it's way overdue for us to have this conversation and for us to make significant change in the law enforcement community and the communities of color that they serve.
Absolutely. I 100% agree with that. And so, of course, that naturally brings me to the death of Rashard Brooks, which occurred, this past weekend. So we are taping the Tuesday before Father's Day weekend here in Atlanta, the Tuesday before Juneteenth, rather. That might be a more appropriate metric. But what I'm noticing in a lot of the discussions about Mr. Brooks' death is just a basic discussion of whether or not it is appropriate for a police officer to kill anyone under any circumstances ever. And, my background is a little bit different. I studied at The Hague for a while, the International Criminal Court. I am completely against the death penalty. I am extremely liberal, very progressive. I do not believe that any officer of the state should kill anyone ever under any circumstances. So I'm obviously very against what happened to Mr. Brooks, just as a matter of principle, without even getting into the facts. So I think what's amazing about this, though, and what's happening in our country is that people are finally talking about this, for lack of a better term, revolution, where we're looking at policing in a way that might eliminate the idea that any kind of state-sanctioned murder or death as being okay. Like we're hoping that we can move away from that, and no matter what crime you commit, you might be able to walk away from at least the police encounter alive, and the classic example that people bring up, modern classic, is Dylan Roof after he killed, I believe it was 9 Black parishioners in a church service. He was apprehended alive, taken to jail. Some say he was taken to Burger King. I don't know if that's a controversial statement or not. I don't know, but he's alive. We know he's alive today. And so, the distinction is being made between how we treat, white criminals, known criminals. Dylan Roof was very open with his position and how he wanted to incite a race war, and he did in fact go in there and murder these people because they were Black. And then of course we have Mr. Brooks, who was allegedly drunk, perhaps whatever. And so, but he was not apprehended and taken alive. And so there's this dichotomy with how people are treated. And so, the overarching theme that I'm seeing, at least amongst my peers, is that no matter what happened in either of those situations, whether we go from the extreme, the Dylan Roof, to Mr. Brooks and his potential DUI, both should have been taken alive. Like they should both be alive right now. Mr. Brooks should still be alive, just as Dylan Roof is. And what do you have to say about that? What are you seeing?
So absolutely, I think the conversation is, I mean, and you know, we could talk about force all day, and so many times when we're seeing these cases, we're talking about the most extreme cases that result in death and are at the hands of a firearm. But I deal with excessive force cases, and I have charged police officers with excessive force cases that don't involve a gun, that don't involve a taser, that involve aspetons, or even just, you know, our natural weapons, which is our hands and our fists. Mm-hmm. So when I look at excessive force cases, I have the gamut of things that I have found inappropriate, because the issue is never the force you use. The issue is the force you're using above and beyond the force that you need to effectuate your duties, which is either taking a subject down or protecting yourself should you find yourself in harm's way. And again, that involves a myriad of weapons, but mostly what we talk about is the firearm and the death cases, even though there's a whole lot in between that are equally bad and equally wrong. And I think that is the conversation that we need to be having, which is, you're absolutely right. Why is it that in some police departments with some defendants, which tend to be white, why is it that they can be committing forcible felonies and somehow be arrested without incident?
Yeah.
Where you have African American males that aren't given that same level of benefit, the ability to be taken in to custody, right or wrong, without that use of force. And that's the conversation we need to have. And frankly, I'll be honest, it's not an easy conversation, because there are police officers every day that, to protect you and I, are placed in harm's way. They are placed in the line of actual bullet fire, right? Yeah. And we can't predict when those circumstances are going to be. We can't predict when something is going to go from not a big deal to a loss of life, potentially. And so we're going to have to be able to have those meaningful conversations. I think it's realistic to think that police officers can do this job without being armed with a taser and a firearm? I don't. There is a lot of violence in the United States, and we could have a whole conversation about firearms.
Yes, that's a whole other podcast.
It's a whole other podcast. But the reality of it is that because we are the United States, a society that is filled with firearms and weapons, legally and illegally, more than any other country, then we can't have police officers that aren't carrying around those same weapons. And I say that to say is, I'm not saying that, I certainly don't think we should be trigger happy, or that police officers' first instinct should be to unholster their weapons, because that does escalate a situation that perhaps doesn't need to be escalated. But I also recognize that there are situations where people are willing to immediately open fire on a police officer. Or people, that they're trying to protect. And I'll take it back to domestic violence because, I mean, people that know me know that I've spent the last 5 years or so down at the legislature trying to advocate for closing what I think are some loopholes for the possession of firearms by convicted domestic violence offenders, and trying to prevent domestic violence offenders from being able to carry and possess weapons, which is a problem in Georgia. But I say that to say is that what most people don't know is that the most dangerous calls for any law enforcement in the country are domestic violence cases, because you don't know what you're walking into. And we have seen continuously that domestic violence offenders in pursuit of a victim generally have no qualms about who is in their line of fire. We have seen whole families be killed. We've seen, the offenders show up at the hair salon to, target a partner and have no qualms about killing every person in that salon, so to speak.
Yeah.
So I say that to say is that law enforcement is dangerous. The nature of the job is dangerous, but communities are suffering at the hands of excessive and unnecessary force. And it's very clear that the communities that are suffering at the hands of force and excessive force are communities of color. And so I think in order to have a valid conversation, we have to recognize and acknowledge that both those propositions are in fact true.
Yes, absolutely.
And if we can acknowledge that both are in fact true, then perhaps we can start to have a conversation on how we fix that problem. But there has to be that acknowledgement that both of those scenarios are in fact true. And how do we move past that? How do we protect the police officers that are doing the right thing, that want to protect communities and themselves? But how do we protect our communities of color who have every right and every inclination to fear the police that are in their neighborhoods, that are distrustful of the police in their neighborhoods, and that are fearful that if they move too quickly or don't have their hands up, or even when they do have their hands up, that they will be shot and killed.
Right.
We have to acknowledge those things in order to move on. And that's the difficult piece.
Right. And I mean, I am a Black woman living in Atlanta, and, I experience a certain amount of privilege, I guess. We can put it that way. But when I'm driving around, I'm just a Black lady in my car. When I get pulled over, I'm terrified. Frankly, like I can't even sugarcoat that. I'm just scared, and I'm not doing anything. I'm just driving. But if I get pulled over, like, if I'm going 5-10 miles over the speed limit, I'm scared. Just always am. And I don't care what color the police officer is. If it's a cop, I'm scared. And so
and it's really difficult, because I will say that, I think there are differences between men and women, and there's differences between races, and
sure.
The Black female experience is very different than the Black male experience. There are things that we as Black females face that our Black male counterparts do not. However, in this area, our Black men are feeling and experiencing things that we aren't experiencing. Because women are not viewed as threats in the way that Black men are. I'm making a generalization, but I think most police officers would say, oh, that's a woman, so it doesn't feel as threatening as a man. And then, of course, you layer on race, and then it's all of a sudden, the Black male has become the highest threat level on the spectrum. when I can tell you as a prosecutor, men, women, Black, white, Hispanic, Asian, I have seen the worst of the worst in every race. And there are certainly people of every race, creed, gender, or color that have come through the criminal justice system that I am equally afraid of and say to myself, we've got to win that case because this person would kill, rape me in my sleep. No doubt.
Right.
And it has nothing to do with who they are, how they look, what gender they are, and what color they are. But we know that bias exists in all of us. And we know that we have a true problem when our police agencies have this level of bias towards Black men in our society.
Yes.
And we've got to figure that out.
Yeah, we do. Thank you so much. I would be remiss, though, if I ended this interview without asking you very specifically this one thing.
Okay.
So we talk about, trying to move people out of the criminal justice system whenever we can, right? So what do you think about involving potentially mediation in some of these cases? And maybe even in, I don't know, maybe domestic violence situations or the cases of juvenile offenders, if we were able to get involved and mediate domestic situations, between your parents and the child, or a husband and a wife, and maybe there's, a disconnect. And I don't know how readily that would translate in DeKalb or even Atlanta Metro in general. But I know that there are some places in the U.S. where they are using some amount of mediation, and of course other places in the world. For example, in Rwanda, where they're using gacaca, is what they call it, where they use a type of mediation to bring people back together. What do you think about that?
So I'm certainly a proponent and a fan of utilizing, where appropriate, what we like to call restorative justice practices, which may include a restorative justice circle or some level of mediation to heal between a victim and a perpetrator of crime. Where it gets complicated, specifically in the domestic violence narrative, you have to have the right kinds of cases, because we know that family violence, battery, especially intimate partner violence, is oftentimes a larger power and control situation where mediation or restorative justice is oftentimes not going to solve the problem and may put our victims in more harm because of the nature of the relationships.
Yeah.
However, I certainly think where we have situations that are non-intimate partner, where families or communities or even neighbors, because what we know is that oftentimes, and we see it in the criminal justice system, is that oftentimes the people that are perpetrators of crimes one week, the next week are victims of crime at the hands of people within their same communities. We have communities that are perpetrating violence against one another. And we have to figure out a way to heal within those communities to prevent additional violence or crime. And so we don't want that cycle to continue. So we don't want, Johnny, who is retaliating because, Jimmy came and did something to Johnny's sister. And now Johnny's, committing a crime against Jimmy because he wants to protect his sister. And then when Jimmy gets hurt, Jimmy's friends are like, well, no, we got to go get Johnny because he hurt Jimmy. When you see circumstances like that, where there is back and forth, crime and violence in a community based on, well, he did this. It all started with him, but it's like we're perpetrating back and forth amongst each other. We're not solving the underlying issue, which is Johnny was just really mad that Jimmy hurt a member of his family. And how do we stop that continuation of disagreement, argument, pain, and retaliation? And so to that extent, I am supportive of finding ways that we can mediate or have restorative justice, because if we solve that underlying problem between those two groups or families, then we're not going to have any more violence in that community.
Right.
But as long as that underlying problem still exists, then the violence will continue with just the next cycle of people all trying to solve that same underlying issue, is that he doesn't like him and she doesn't like her.
Right.
And that's what we have to be mindful of. And those are the types of things we have to be willing to fix.
Absolutely. That makes perfect sense. Yeah. Well, Sherry, thank you so much. I appreciate you. You have given so much information and so much insight into your thought process into the criminal justice system, your progressive mindset. I love it. Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you so much for having me virtually.
I know, it's crazy, right? With COVID, you're appearing by Zoom, so we can't really be in the same room together. But it worked. And I love it. Thank you so much. I'm gonna continue to bug you, because that's generally what I do. So thank you again, Sherry, and I'll just say goodbye. Yeah, we'll be in touch soon. And so for everybody who is listening, I hope you really got a lot out of this conversation. If you have follow-up questions, please do reach out to either of us. It's probably easier if you reach out to me. I'm far less busy than DA Boston. You can reach me at wwheeler@milesmediation.com. Thanks.
Thank you.
All right, Sherry, thank you so much. That was great. Yay!
You're welcome.
That was so freaking cool. You gave me so much information. It was awesome. I learned a lot. I mean, it was great. It was super great. So that all of that info about like restorative justice, that's amazing. Is there something that we could do or ways we can promote that? Or do you need... We've examined a couple cases in our office that we thought might be good candidates for like a restorative justice circle. Uh-huh. We have not yet landed on either the right case or have participants that would be willing to engage in that process. Okay.
But we probably looked at 3 or 4 situations where we're like, let's look at this and see and if it will work. And actually one was a homicide case where a juvenile was charged. It was like he was 15, almost 16 when he accidentally killed a 2-year-old in the community by shooting a firearm at another vehicle. And it went into another car and hit and killed the baby in the back seat. And that was a community where family members of the one and family members of the other all kind of lived in the same area. And there was a lot of back and forth and a lot of, the situation has kind of been elevated because of, how people in each of the families feel about the situation. So, but the 15-year-old, the 16-year, he's now 16, we didn't feel that he was emotionally capable of participating in the process in the way that it would be helpful and not more harmful.
Right.
So that was one that we thought, oh, this might be a good way, but he's just not mature enough to engage in the conversation with a family. It would, if you had two kids that were arguing and you wanted to, they can be on the same level, but for a young person to try to explain to a mother who's lost her baby, how he feels about the situation, we just felt like it wasn't a good fit. And we've had a couple others that we've looked at, but that's the hard part. We've not found the right kind of cases, and we want to model our practices after Dan Satterberg, who is the state's attorney in Seattle, which is King County. He has done some really good work he's got a great restorative justice practice program out there. And so we've been talking to them and wanted to follow and get an idea about some of the model they've used. But it's something that we're trying to bring to Georgia, but it's not easy to start. You've got to have, like I said, the right case and the right circumstances and the right participants. Right. Because it does have to be, both sides have to be willing to engage in the process.
Right. And that has to be complicated.
And that's not always something that one or both sides are willing to do, even when you find facts that you think, well, this is something we could try. And that's kind of been our thought process, that every time we get to one where we're like, could this work? One side we realize it's not going to work.
Is that something that you do, like when you're talking about reentry?
Well, we are not as involved in the reentry process just because, first of all, Georgia has the Department of Community Supervision, which deals with reentry. But, once a case is sentenced and somebody goes to prison or on probation, we're not really involved with those folks unless they violate the terms and come back to court. And generally, people that are exiting prison are, either being placed on parole or they finish their sentence. And so we are not robustly involved in reentry. But reentry is a space where restorative justice may be sometimes better suited because time has passed. And see, for us, when we're doing things right now, there might not have been enough time involved for people to feel like they're ready to engage with the person on the other side.
Right. Well, it is late, so I got to let you run.
Thank you so much for having me. I appreciate it.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
You've been listening to The Future of Resolution, the podcast. You can follow The Future of Resolution on Miles Mediation and Arbitration's Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook. If you haven't yet, go to Apple Podcast, Stitcher, Spotify, and subscribe, rate, or review this podcast. Join us soon for another interesting discussion. Thank you for listening.